The autumn rain hammered against the windows of the Riverside Police Department, like accusations from the past. Detective Ray Kellerman sat hunched over his desk, the amber glow of his desk lamp casting long shadows across case files that had grown yellow with age. Outside, the wind howled through the skeletal branches of the old oak trees that lined Maple Street, their bare limbs scratching against the building like fingernails on a coffin lid. It was October 15th, 2008, and Ray had been staring at the same photograph for the better part of an hour. The image showed a young woman with copper-red hair and emerald eyes that seemed to look right through him, even from beyond whatever fate had claimed her 11 years ago. Delilah Montgomery, 22 years old, when she vanished without a trace from this very town of Riverside Falls. Population 8,047, according to the weathered sign at the town limits. Ray's fingers trembled slightly as he picked up the photograph. 11 years on the force, and this case still made his blood run cold. He'd been a rookie patrol officer when Delilah disappeared, fresh out of the academy with dreams of making a difference in his quiet hometown. Now, at 34, those dreams had been tempered by reality, but his obsession with this particular case had only grown stronger with time. The clock on the wall ticked past midnight, its steady rhythm the only sound competing with the storm outside. Ray's partner, Detective Luis Vasquez, had gone home hours ago, shaking his head at Ray's refusal to let the old case rest. "She's been gone 11 years, hermano," Luis had said. "Maybe it's time to accept that some mysteries don't get solved." But Ray couldn't let it go. Not when he still woke up in cold sweats, dreaming of those emerald eyes pleading for help he'd never been able to provide. The case file spread before him told the story in stark, clinical terms that failed to capture the horror that had gripped Riverside Falls in the autumn of Delilah Montgomery, a recent college graduate working at the town's only bookstore, had vanished on a Tuesday evening after closing up shop. Her car was found 3 days later in the parking lot of Miller's Diner, 15 miles outside of town, keys still in the ignition, purse intact on the passenger seat, and no sign of struggle. Ray leaned back in his chair, the old leather creaking in protest. He'd memorized every detail of that October night 11 years ago. The temperature had dropped to 38 degrees, unusual for mid-October in southeastern Pennsylvania. A harvest moon hung low in the sky, casting an eerie orange glow over the town. The last person to see Delilah alive was Mrs. Edith Cromwell, an elderly woman who frequented the bookstore and had stayed late browsing the mystery section. She seemed troubled about something, Mrs. Cromwell had told the investigating officers. Kept looking out the window like she was expecting someone, or maybe afraid someone might show up. Ray flipped through the witness statements, each one as familiar as his own name. There was Tommy Brennan, the 17-year-old who delivered newspapers and claimed he'd seen a dark sedan parked across from the bookstore around closing time. The vehicle had tinted windows and out-of-state plates, though Tommy couldn't remember which state. His description had led nowhere, just like every other lead in the case. Then there was Father Michael O'Sullivan from St. Catherine's Church, who insisted he'd heard a woman screaming around 9:30 p.m. that Tuesday night. The church sat on a hill overlooking the business district, and Father O'Sullivan claimed the scream had echoed up from somewhere near Main Street. But when officers canvassed the area, they found nothing. No witnesses, no signs of disturbance, no evidence that anything had happened at all. The rain intensified, drumming against the windows with increasing urgency. Ray stood and walked to the window, peering out into the darkness. The street below was empty, except for the occasional car passing under the streetlights, their headlights cutting through the downpour like searching eyes. His reflection stared back at him from the glass, a man aged beyond his years, with prematurely gray temples and lines around his eyes that spoke of too many sleepless nights. The case had taken its toll on him. He knew that. "You care more about dead strangers than your living family," she'd said during one of their final arguments. The words had cut deep because they carried a grain of truth. Ray did care, perhaps too much. But someone had to speak for the victims who couldn't speak for themselves. On the counter near the register sat an open book, a copy of Edgar Allan Poe's complete works, Turned to the Raven. A bookmark made from what appeared to be a pressed flower marked the page, though no one could identify the type of flower or explain how it had gotten there. Delilah's friends and family insisted she wasn't particularly fond of Poe, preferring contemporary romance novels. The phone rang, startling him from his thoughts. The caller ID showed a local number he didn't recognize. "Detective Kellerman," he answered. Ray's blood turned to ice. "Who is this?" "The one who knows where she went. The one who's been waiting for you to understand." "Understand what?" Ray grabbed a pen, ready to take notes. That some doors should never be opened. That some questions should never be answered. The voice grew fainter, as if the caller was moving away from the phone. "But you can't stop, can you? You can't let her rest." "Wait," Ray started, but the line went dead. He immediately called the operator to trace the number, but it came back to a payphone outside the old Riverside Falls cemetery, 3 miles north of town. By the time Ray drove out there, the booth was empty, and the only evidence of recent use was the lingering scent of cigarettes and something else, something sweet and cloying that reminded him of funeral flowers. Ray spent the next hour combing through the cemetery, his flashlight beam dancing across weathered headstones and memorial plaques. The rain had stopped, but the air remained thick with moisture and the earthy smell of wet leaves. He found himself drawn to the older section of the cemetery, where the stones dated back to the 1800s and many of the inscriptions had been worn smooth by time and weather. It was there, beneath a twisted willow tree, that he found something that made his heart race. A fresh bouquet of flowers lay on an unmarked grave, flowers with dark teardrop-shaped petals that matched the pressed specimen from Delilah's bookstore. Ray knelt beside the grave, careful not to disturb the bouquet, and examined the flowers more closely. They seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, their petals so dark they appeared to be made of shadow itself. A twig snapped somewhere behind him. Ray spun around, his hand instinctively moving to his service weapon, but saw only empty space between the headstones. The cemetery was silent except for the distant sound of water dripping from the trees and the soft whisper of wind through dead leaves. "Hello?" he called out. "Is someone there?" No response came, but Ray couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. The sensation crawled up his spine like cold fingers, and he found himself thinking of the mysterious caller's words. "She's calling to you, detective. Can you hear her?" He photographed the flowers from every angle, then carefully collected one specimen, using a handkerchief. The petal felt strange between his fingers, not quite solid, as if it might dissolve at any moment. He sealed it in an evidence bag and made his way back to his car, glancing over his shoulder every few steps. The drive back to the police station took him through the heart of Riverside Falls, past the shuttered bookstore, where Delilah had worked. The building had remained empty since her disappearance, despite several attempts by the owner to rent it out. Tenants never lasted more than a few weeks, all complaining of strange noises, unexplained cold spots, and the persistent feeling of being watched. Ray pulled over and studied the dark storefront. The "For Rent" sign in the window was faded and rain-stained, and someone had spray-painted "Cursed" across the front door in red letters that looked disturbingly like dried blood in the glow of his headlights. As he sat there, Ray's phone buzzed with a text message from an unknown number. "Tomorrow, midnight. The bookstore. Come alone if you want the truth about Delilah Montgomery." Ray stared at the message, his pulse quickening. Every instinct told him it was a trap, possibly set by the same person who had called him earlier. But after 11 years of dead ends and sleepless nights, he was willing to take the risk if it meant finally getting answers. He drove home to his empty apartment. The silence there, even more oppressive than usual. The place felt like a museum of his failed marriage. Jessica's belongings long gone, leaving behind only the furniture they'd picked out together and faded rectangles on the walls where her paintings had hung. Ray poured himself 3 fingers of bourbon and sat in his recliner, staring at the evidence bag containing the mysterious flower petal. Under the lamplight it seemed to pulse with a life of its own, the dark surface rippling like water disturbed by an unseen wind. He thought about Delilah Montgomery's family, her parents who had moved away from Riverside Falls 5 years after her disappearance, unable to bear the constant reminders of their lost daughter. Her younger sister Amanda, who still called Ray every few months asking if there had been any new developments. Her college boyfriend Derek, who had become the primary suspect for a brief period until his alibi checked out completely. The case had destroyed lives, left behind a wake of grief and unanswered questions that festered like untreated wounds. And now, after 11 years of silence, someone was finally offering answers. The question was whether Ray would survive long enough to hear them. Outside his window, the storm had passed, leaving behind a clear night sky filled with stars. But Ray found no comfort in their distant light. Tomorrow night, he would walk into the abandoned bookstore alone, armed with nothing but his service weapon and 11 years of burning questions. He finished his bourbon and tried to sleep, but rest eluded him. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw Delilah Montgomery's face, her emerald eyes filled with a desperation that transcended death itself, and somewhere in the darkness of his apartment, he could swear he heard the faint sound of a woman's voice, calling his name. The clock beside his bed ticked toward dawn, each second bringing him closer to whatever truth awaited him in the shadows of the abandoned bookstore. Ray Kellerman had spent 11 years seeking answers to questions that had consumed his life. Tomorrow night, he would finally get them. Whether he would survive the revelation was another matter entirely. As the first pale light of dawn crept through his bedroom window, Ray finally drifted into an uneasy sleep, his dreams filled with dark flowers and emerald eyes that seemed to beckon him toward a truth that might be more terrifying than the mystery itself. The autumn wind whispered through the trees outside, carrying with it the sound of a woman's voice, soft and pleading, calling out from somewhere beyond the veil between the living and the dead. In Riverside Falls, some secrets had been buried for too long, and the time had come for them to claw their way back to the surface. Ray Kellerman's long nightmare was about to begin. The day crept by with the agonizing pace of a funeral procession. Ray Kellerman couldn't concentrate on anything except the approaching midnight rendezvous. He went through the motions of police work, reviewing other cases, filing reports, attending the daily briefing, but his mind remained fixed on the text message and whatever truth awaited him in the abandoned bookstore. Detective Luis Vasquez noticed his partner's distraction immediately. "You look like death warmed over, Ray. What's eating at you?" Ray hesitated, then decided against sharing the details of the mysterious contact. Luis had already expressed his concerns about Ray's obsession with the Montgomery case, revealing that he planned to meet an unknown caller alone at midnight would only result in Luis insisting on backup, which might scare off their only potential lead. "Just tired," Ray lied, shuffling papers on his desk. "Didn't sleep well." Louise studied him with knowing eyes. "This is about the Montgomery girl again, isn't it?" "Ray, I need to follow every lead," Ray interrupted, "no matter how cold the trail gets." As evening approached, Ray found himself driving past the bookstore repeatedly, studying the building from different angles. The structure was a relic from the 1920s, built of red brick that had darkened with age and weather. Large windows that once displayed featured books now stared out like blind eyes, their glass surfaces reflecting nothing but darkness. The store occupied the corner of Main Street and Elm Avenue, positioned so that anyone inside could observe traffic from both directions. It had been the perfect location for a business, which made its current state of abandonment all the more unsettling. Local teenagers had dubbed it the Dead Store, claiming they could sometimes see a figure moving through the darkened interior on moonless nights. Ray parked 3 blocks away at 11:45 p.m. and walked through the empty streets of downtown Riverside Falls. The business district rolled up its sidewalks early, leaving behind a ghost town of shuttered shops and darkened windows. His footsteps echoed off the brick buildings, the sound seeming to multiply in the cold night air. The temperature had dropped to near freezing, and his breath formed small clouds that dissipated quickly in the still air. Above, a crescent moon cast just enough light to navigate by, while the streetlights created pools of yellow illumination that seemed to emphasize the darkness between them. As Ray approached the bookstore, he noticed that the front door stood slightly ajar, unusual since the building had been secured with a heavy padlock for years. He drew his service weapon and approached cautiously, using his flashlight to peer through the gap. "Hello?" he called softly. "I'm here as requested." A voice drifted from somewhere deep within the store, so faint he might have imagined it. "Come in, detective. We have been waiting." Ray pushed the door open and stepped inside. The interior smelled of dust, mildew, and something else, that same sweet, cloying scent he'd detected at the cemetery payphone. His flashlight beam revealed empty bookshelves, stretching toward the back of the store, their wooden surfaces thick with accumulated grime. The beam caught something glinting near the counter, the same spot where Delilah's book had been found 11 years ago. Ray moved closer and discovered a brass key lying on the dust-covered surface, ornate and old-fashioned, unlike any key he'd seen in modern Riverside Falls. "Pick it up," the voice instructed from the shadows. Ray spun around, trying to locate the speaker, but his flashlight revealed nothing but empty space between the shelves. "Who are you?" Ray demanded. "Show yourself." "I'm someone who knew Delilah Montgomery better than anyone realized. Someone who's been carrying her secrets for 11 years. The voice seemed to move, emanating from different locations within the store. Ray kept his weapon drawn, though he wasn't sure what good it would do against someone who could apparently move unseen through the darkness. "What secrets?" Ray asked, pocketing the brass key while keeping his flashlight and gun ready. She wasn't the innocent bookstore clerk everyone believed her to be. "Detective, Delilah Montgomery was involved in something that went back generations in this town, something that certain people would kill to keep hidden." Ray's pulse quickened. "What kind of something?" A figure materialized from the shadows near the back of the store, a woman in her 50s with silver-streaked hair and wearing a dark coat that seemed to absorb the flashlight beam. Her face was familiar, though Ray couldn't immediately place her. "My name is Victoria Blackwood," she said, raising her hands to show she was unarmed. "I was Delilah's mentor, you might say, though the police never knew about our relationship." Ray kept his weapon trained on her while his mind raced through the case files. The name Victoria Blackwood didn't appear anywhere in the investigation records, which seemed impossible if she'd known Delilah well. "Why didn't you come forward 11 years ago?" Ray demanded. Victoria smiled sadly. "Because I was protecting her, even in death. But time is running out, detective. The same forces that claimed Delilah are stirring again, and they won't stop until they have silenced everyone who knows the truth." "What truth?" "Stop speaking in riddles and tell me what happened to her." Victoria gestured toward the back of the store. "Follow me. There's something you need to see." Against his better judgment, Ray followed her through the maze of empty shelves toward what had once been the store's office. Victoria produced a small LED flashlight and illuminated a section of the back wall that looked different from the rest, newer, as if it had been recently repaired. "The key," Victoria said, extending her hand. "That key opens something the original investigators never found." Ray reluctantly handed over the brass key, watching as Victoria inserted it into what appeared to be a solid wall. To his amazement, a section of the wall swung inward on hidden hinges, revealing a narrow staircase leading down into darkness. "A basement?" Ray asked, though the building plans on file with the city showed no basement level. "Much more than that," Victoria replied, starting down the stairs. "This is where Delilah spent her final hours. This is where she learned the truth about Riverside Falls." Ray followed her down the wooden steps, his flashlight beam revealing stone walls that looked far older than the building above. The air grew colder with each step, and the sweet, cloying scent became stronger. At the bottom of the stairs, they emerged into a circular chamber carved from natural rock. The space was larger than should have been possible, given the footprint of the building above. Strange symbols were carved into the walls, and the floor was inlaid with what appeared to be a complex geometric pattern made from different colored stones. In the center of the pattern sat an ornate wooden chair facing a stone altar. Ray's blood ran cold as he recognized the chair from crime scene photographs. It was identical to one that had been found in Delilah's apartment, though no one had been able to determine its significance. "What is this place?" Ray whispered. "The heart of something that's been here since before Riverside Falls was officially founded," Victoria explained. "A secret society that's influenced this town's development for over 2 centuries. Delilah discovered their existence, and they killed her for it." Victoria moved to the altar, where Ray's flashlight revealed more of the dark flowers arranged around what looked like an ancient book bound in leather that had turned black with age. "The Blackwood Society," Victoria continued, "named after my ancestor who helped establish it in 1823. They have controlled the major decisions in this town for generations: who gets elected, which businesses succeed, which families prosper, and which ones disappear." Ray studied the carved symbols, noting that some of them appeared to match the geometric pattern he'd seen pressed into the flower bookmark found at the crime scene. And Delilah found out about this. She was researching local history for a book she wanted to write. Innocent enough, until she started asking the wrong questions and digging into old records that should have remained buried. Victoria's voice carried a weight of guilt and regret. "I tried to warn her, to make her understand the danger, but she was determined to expose the truth." "So they killed her?" "Not directly. The society doesn't get its hands dirty with crude murder. They have other methods." Victoria opened the ancient book, revealing pages covered in symbols and text written in what appeared to be Latin. They used rituals passed down through generations to make people disappear without a trace. No body, no evidence, no way to prove a crime was committed. Ray felt his rational, logical mind rebelling against what he was hearing, but the evidence of the hidden chamber made it impossible to dismiss entirely. "You are talking about magic, supernatural nonsense. I'm talking about power, detective. Power that comes from knowledge, from understanding forces that most people refuse to acknowledge exist." Victoria turned several pages in the book, stopping at an illustration that made Ray's stomach lurch. The image showed a young woman bound to the chair in the center of the chamber, surrounded by hooded figures performing some kind of ceremony. The woman's face was turned toward the viewer, and her eyes held the same desperate plea Ray had seen in every photograph of Delilah Montgomery. "They brought her here on the night she disappeared," Victoria said quietly, "forced her to participate in a ritual that would transfer her life force to maintain their power. It's how they have stayed influential for so long, by feeding on the energy of those who threaten to expose them." Ray's hand trembled as he studied the illustration. "If you knew this was happening, why didn't you stop it?" "Because I'm not just Delilah's mentor, detective. I'm also a member of the society." Victoria's admission hit Ray like a physical blow. "My family has been part of it for generations. I was raised to believe in its mission, to see the disappearances as necessary sacrifices for the greater good of the community." "Then why are you telling me this now?" Victoria closed the book and turned to face him fully. "Because Delilah wasn't supposed to die. The ritual was meant to bind her to the society's will, to make her forget what she'd learned and become one of our servants. But something went wrong. Her spirit was too strong, too pure. Instead of being bound, she was scattered." "Scattered?" "Her consciousness was fragmented across different planes of existence. Part of her spirit remained trapped here in this chamber. Part of it followed the society members who participated in the ritual. And part of it," Victoria paused, studying Ray's face intently, "part of it attached itself to the one person who refused to give up searching for her." Ray felt the color drain from his face as the implication hit him. You are saying she's been with me for 11 years? Haven't you felt her presence, detective? The dreams, the obsession that won't let you rest. The way this case has consumed your life in ways that go beyond professional duty. Ray thought about the sleepless nights, the divorce, the way Delilah's face had haunted him for over a decade. He'd attributed it to guilt and professional frustration, but now he wondered if there might be another explanation. The flowers, he said suddenly, the ones that don't exist in nature, manifestations of her spirit, trying to communicate with you. She's been guiding you, detective, leading you to this moment when the truth could finally be revealed. A sound echoed from the staircase above them. Footsteps, multiple sets, moving with purpose and stealth. Victoria's face went pale in the flashlight beam. They know, she whispered. The society knows I have brought you here. Then we need to leave, now. Ray grabbed Victoria's arm, but she pulled away. There's no escape, detective. Not from here, not from them. They have had 11 years to prepare for this moment. Victoria moved to the altar and picked up one of the dark flowers. But there is another way. What way? Complete the ritual. Not as they intended it, but as it should have been done. Give Delilah's spirit the closure it needs to move on, and expose the society's crimes to the world. The footsteps on the stairs grew closer. Ray could hear voices now, low and urgent, speaking in what sounded like the same Latin he'd seen in the ancient book. What do you need me to do? Ray asked, making a decision that went against every rational thought in his head. Victoria handed him the flower. Place this on the chair where Delilah died. Speak her name 3 times, and promise her that justice will be done. Ray took the flower, its petals feeling warm against his skin for the first time. As he approached the chair, the temperature in the chamber seemed to drop even further, and he could swear he heard the faint sound of a woman's voice whispering his name. Delilah Montgomery, he said, placing the flower on the chair's worn wooden seat. Delilah Montgomery. Delilah Montgomery. I promise you that justice will be done. The chamber exploded with light, not from their flashlights, but from some source that seemed to emanate from the walls themselves. The carved symbols began to glow with an ethereal blue radiance, and the geometric pattern on the floor pulsed like a heartbeat, made of starlight. Ray felt something shift inside his mind, as if a door that had been locked for 11 years had suddenly swung wide open. Images flooded his consciousness, memories that weren't his own, experiences filtered through Delilah's perspective during her final hours. He saw hooded figures dragging her down the stairs, their faces hidden but their voices familiar. He felt her terror as they bound her to the chair, her desperate attempts to break free as they began their chanting. And then he saw something that made his blood freeze in his veins. One of the hooded figures had pushed back his hood, revealing a face Ray knew well. A face that had been involved in the original investigation, that had access to evidence and the ability to steer the case away from dangerous discoveries. Chief Harrison, Ray whispered, the name escaping his lips like a curse. The footsteps on the stairs had stopped. In the sudden silence, Ray could hear his own heartbeat thundering in his ears. Now you know, Victoria said quietly. Now you understand why the case was never solved, why every lead ran cold, why evidence mysteriously disappeared from the files. Ray's mind reeled as the implications crashed over him. Chief Harrison, the man who had mentored him, who had assigned him to work cold cases, who had been like a father figure for the past 11 years, was the one responsible for Delilah's death. The others, Ray managed to ask. Who else is involved? Judge Pemberton, Mayor Collins, Dr. Westbrook at the hospital, half the town council. Victoria moved toward a different section of the wall, revealing another hidden passage. The society isn't just a few people, detective. It's a network that includes most of the powerful families in Riverside Falls. The light in the chamber began to fade, and Ray felt the presence that had been with him for 11 years, starting to withdraw. But before it departed completely, he experienced one final vision. Delilah's face, no longer filled with desperation, but with gratitude and peace. "Thank you," her voice whispered in his mind. "Now finish what I started." The chamber returned to normal darkness just as voices echoed from the staircase above. "Kellerman," Chief Harrison's voice boomed through the basement. "Come up here. We need to talk." Ray looked at Victoria, who was already disappearing into the hidden passage. "There's evidence," she said urgently. "Documents, photographs, records of all their victims going back decades, hidden in a safe deposit box at First National Bank, box 1147. Key is taped under the altar." She pressed something into his hand, a small recording device. "Everything we have discussed tonight is on there. Get it to someone outside of Riverside Falls. Someone the society can't reach." "What about you?" Ray asked, but Victoria was already gone, swallowed by the darkness of the secret passage. "Kellerman." Harrison's voice was closer now, at the bottom of the stairs. "Don't make this harder than it has to be." Ray quickly retrieved the key from under the altar and pocketed it along with the recording device. He holstered his weapon and walked toward the staircase, his mind racing with plans and possibilities. As he climbed the stairs, Ray realized that his 11-year nightmare was far from over. If anything, it was just beginning. But for the first time since Delilah Montgomery's disappearance, he finally knew the truth. And truth, no matter how dangerous, was always better than living with lies. Chief Harrison waited at the top of the stairs, flanked by two other figures Ray recognized, Judge Pemberton and Mayor Collins. All three men wore expressions of regret tinged with deadly resolve. "I'm sorry it's come to this, Ray," Harrison said quietly. "I really am. You have been like a son to me." "Then why?" Ray asked, though he already knew the answer. "Because some things are more important than individual lives. The society has protected this town for 2 centuries. We have kept it prosperous, safe, thriving. A few sacrifices along the way, that's the price of stability." Ray nodded slowly, as if he understood and accepted their reasoning. But his hand was already moving toward his weapon, and his mind was calculating distances and angles. The final confrontation was about to begin, and only one side would walk away alive. The truth about Delilah Montgomery had finally been revealed. But whether that truth would ever see the light of day depended entirely on what happened in the next few minutes. The silence in the abandoned bookstore stretched like a held breath before a scream. Ray Kellerman stood at the top of the basement stairs, facing 3 men who had shaped his entire career, and who had been living lies for decades. Chief Harrison's weathered face showed genuine sorrow, but his hand rested on his service weapon with the practiced ease of someone prepared to use it. "I trained you too well, Ray," Harrison said quietly. "Always told you to follow the evidence wherever it leads. Should have known you'd eventually follow it here." Judge Pemberton, a thin man in his 70s with silver hair and cold eyes, stepped forward. "We can still salvage this situation." Detective Kellerman experienced a mental breakdown brought on by years of obsession with an unsolvable case. Tragically, he took his own life in the very location where his fixation began. "That's your solution?" Ray asked, his voice steady despite the adrenaline coursing through his veins. "Stage my suicide." Mayor Collins, younger than the others, but with the same calculating expression, nodded grimly. "The alternative is much messier. We'd prefer to avoid that, given our relationship." Ray's mind raced through his options. 3 armed men blocked his path to the front exit, and he had no idea where Victoria's secret passage led, but he had advantages they didn't know about. The recording device in his pocket was still running, and he'd sent a delayed text message to Louise earlier that evening. Time to go out at 1 a.m. if Ray didn't cancel it. The message contained only an address and the words, "If something happens to me, start here." "Before you make me disappear like Delilah," Ray said, slowly raising his hands but keeping his voice conversational. "I'm curious about something. How many others have there been over the years?" Harrison's expression tightened. That's not your concern. Humor a dead man's curiosity. The ritual chamber downstairs, it's seen a lot of use, hasn't it? Those symbols on the walls didn't stay carved that deep from just one ceremony. Pemberton and Collins exchanged glances. The judge spoke first. The society has maintained its responsibilities to this community for over 2 centuries. Sometimes that requires difficult decisions. Difficult decisions, Ray repeated. Is that what you called it when you murdered Jennifer Walsh in 1989? Or Thomas Brennan in 19... The names hit their targets like physical blows. Ray had spent years researching missing persons cases in Riverside Falls, never connecting them until tonight. But now, with the truth about the Blackwood Society revealed, patterns emerged that had been invisible before. You have been feeding, Ray continued, taking a small step backward toward the basement stairs. That's what Victoria meant about transferring life force. You have been ritually murdering people for decades to maintain your power and influence. Chief Harrison's facade finally cracked. You don't understand what we have preserved. This town was dying in the 1800s, crop failures, economic collapse, people fleeing to the cities. The society saved Riverside Falls. Our methods may seem harsh, but they work. Look around you: prosperity, low crime rates, stable families. That doesn't happen by accident. It happens through murder, Ray shot back. How many families have you destroyed to maintain your perfect little town? 47, Judge Pemberton said coldly. 47 individuals over 200 years, less than 1 person every 4 years. Compare that to any major city's annual murder rate, and tell me we are the real monsters. The casual admission hit Ray like a sledgehammer. 47 people, men, women, children, systematically eliminated because they posed a threat to the society's control. And these men discussed it like a cost-benefit analysis. What made them threats? Ray asked, genuinely wanting to understand the twisted logic. Journalists asking too many questions, Collins replied. Historians digging into records we'd rather keep buried. Federal investigators getting too close to certain irregularities in town finances. People like Delilah Montgomery, who thought they could expose us without consequences. Ray felt the recording device's weight in his pocket like a lifeline. Every word was being captured, creating an audio record that would destroy the society if it ever reached the right people. And you, Ray, Harrison added sadly. You became a threat the moment you refused to let the Montgomery case die. We hoped your obsession would burn itself out, but instead it only grew stronger. That should have been our first clue that something supernatural was involved. Supernatural? Delilah's spirit, Pemberton explained. The ritual went wrong. Instead of binding her essence to our service, we accidentally created a connection between her consciousness and yours. She's been using you as an anchor to this plane, feeding you information and driving your investigation. Ray thought about the dreams, the sleepless nights, the ways certain pieces of evidence had seemed to call out to him over the years. If they were telling the truth, then his entire investigation had been guided by a dead woman's spirit seeking justice. Where is she now? Ray asked. Gone, Harrison replied. Victoria's little ceremony downstairs severed the connection. Delilah Montgomery's spirit has finally moved on, which means your supernatural protection is gone too. A new voice cut through the darkness from the back of the store. Not quite. Victoria Blackwood emerged from the shadows between the empty bookshelves. But she wasn't alone. Luis Vasquez followed behind her, his weapon drawn and his face grim with understanding. Got your message early, Hermano, Luis said to Ray. Decided not to wait until 1 a.m. to check on you. Good thing this lady was waiting outside to fill me in on what's really been happening in our quiet little town. The 3 society members spun toward the new threat, but Victoria raised her hand in a gesture that seemed to freeze them in place. Gentlemen, I think it's time we discussed the terms of your surrender. You are outnumbered, Victoria, Harrison snarled. 3-2, and we are all armed. 3-4, actually, Victoria corrected. She raised her voice slightly. You can come out now. 2 more figures emerged from the darkness. FBI Special Agents Rebecca Cross and David Park, their credentials clearly visible and their weapons trained on the society members. We have been investigating financial irregularities in Riverside Falls for 6 months, Agent Cross announced. Anonymous tips kept pointing us toward a conspiracy involving local officials, but we never imagined anything like this. Ray stared at Victoria in amazement. You contacted the FBI? Weeks ago, she replied. I have been planning this moment for a long time, Detective. The society's time was always going to end. I just needed the right catalyst to make it happen cleanly. Harrison's face went white with rage. You treacherous bitch. Your family helped found this organization. We have protected your bloodline for generations. And that protection came at a price I'm no longer willing to pay. Victoria said calmly. 47 innocent people, Chief. That's 47 too many. Agent Park moved forward with handcuffs. Chief Warren Harrison, you are under arrest for conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering, and about a dozen federal charges we are still calculating. This is insane, Collins protested as Agent Cross moved to arrest him. You can't prove any of this. It's all the ramblings of a mentally disturbed police officer and a delusional old woman. Ray pulled out the recording device, still running after capturing nearly an hour of conversation. Actually, I think we can prove quite a bit. The next few hours passed in a blur of activity. FBI forensic teams descended on the bookstore and the hidden basement chamber, photographing evidence and collecting samples from the ritual space. The safe deposit box key led to a treasure trove of documents dating back to the society's founding, detailed records of victims, financial transactions, and membership lists that implicated dozens of prominent citizens. As dawn broke over Riverside Falls, Ray stood outside the bookstore watching the last of the evidence being loaded into FBI vehicles. The building that had haunted his dreams for 11 years looked different now, smaller somehow, less threatening in the golden morning light. Lewis approached with 2 cups of coffee from the diner across the street. Hell of a night, partner. Hell of an 11 years, Ray replied, accepting the coffee gratefully. So what happens now? To the town, I mean, half the leadership is going to prison. Ray thought about that. Riverside Falls would need to rebuild, to find new leaders who weren't part of a centuries-old murder conspiracy. It would be messy and painful, but maybe it was time for the town to grow beyond the artificial prosperity built on innocent blood. It will survive, Ray said finally. Towns are more than their leaders. The people here are good. They just never knew what was being done in their name. Agent Cross joined them, flipping through a thick folder of documents. Detective Kellerman, I wanted to thank you personally. This investigation is going to be massive. We are looking at RICO charges, civil rights violations, murder conspiracies going back decades. Without your 11 years of obsessive casework, we never would have had enough to build a prosecution. What about Victoria? Ray asked. She was a society member too, cooperating witness with immunity. Cross replied. Her information is helping us identify victims and unravel financial crimes that go back 50 years. She will probably spend the rest of her life testifying in various trials. Ray nodded, understanding the justice in that arrangement. Victoria had been complicit in terrible crimes, but she'd also been brave enough to bring down the entire conspiracy when it mattered most. As the FBI convoy prepared to leave town, Ray found himself drawn back to the cemetery where this final chapter had begun. The unmarked grave where he'd found the mysterious flowers was easy to locate in daylight, a simple depression in the earth beneath the twisted willow tree. But the grave wasn't unmarked anymore. Someone had placed a small stone marker there during the night, inscribed with elegant script, Delilah Montgomery, 1975-1997, finally at rest. Ray knelt beside the marker, placing a bouquet of normal flowers, daisies and roses from the florist shop on Main Street. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for not letting me give up, for helping me find the truth." The morning breeze rustled through the willow branches, and for just a moment Ray could have sworn he heard a woman's voice whispering, "Thank you for listening." 6 months later, Ray sat in a federal courthouse in Philadelphia, watching as the last of the Blackwood Society members received their sentences. Chief Harrison got life without parole for multiple counts of conspiracy to commit murder. Judge Pemberton died of a heart attack 3 days after his arrest, taking some secrets to his grave. Mayor Collins received 25 years and was already cooperating with investigators to reduce his sentence. The trials had revealed the full scope of the society's crimes. 47 victims over 2 centuries, their deaths disguised as accidents, suicides, or simple disappearances. Families who had spent decades wondering what happened to their loved ones finally had answers, though those answers brought cold comfort. Ray had testified in 17 different proceedings, his 11 years of obsessive casework providing crucial evidence in conviction. After conviction, the media had dubbed him the detective who wouldn't quit, turning him into something of a folk hero. The attention made him uncomfortable, but he endured it as part of his responsibility to the victims. Riverside Falls itself was slowly healing. New elections had brought in a completely fresh city government, and federal oversight was helping the town establish transparent, accountable institutions. Property values had initially crashed as news of the conspiracy broke, but they were beginning to recover as people realized the town's fundamental strengths remained intact. Ray had been offered promotions, transfers to larger departments, even consulting opportunities with private investigation firms. He'd turned them all down, choosing instead to remain in Riverside Falls as the new police chief. Someone needed to help the town rebuild its law enforcement credibility, and Ray felt a responsibility to see the healing process through to completion. The nightmares had stopped. For the first time in 11 years, Ray slept peacefully through the night, no longer haunted by emerald eyes pleading for help he couldn't provide. His ex-wife Jessica had even called to congratulate him on solving the case that had consumed his life and destroyed their marriage. She'd remarried and seemed happy, which Ray found he could accept without bitterness. On quiet evenings, when his duties as chief allowed, Ray would sometimes drive past the old bookstore. The building had been purchased by a young couple who planned to renovate it and reopen it as a bookstore and coffee shop. They'd asked Ray about the building's history, and he'd told them the truth, all of it. They'd decided to proceed anyway, believing that places could be redeemed through love and positive purpose. Ray thought they might be right. The basement chamber had been sealed permanently, filled with concrete and officially forgotten. But the building above could serve the community in ways its original builders never intended. Sometimes the best response to darkness was simply to let in more light. Standing outside the renovated bookstore on a crisp October evening, exactly 12 years after Delilah Montgomery's disappearance, Ray felt a sense of completion he hadn't experienced in over a decade. The case that had defined his career and consumed his life was finally truly closed. But as he turned to walk back to his car, Ray noticed something that made him pause. In the window of the soon-to-reopen bookstore, illuminated by the soft glow of construction lights, sat a single book on display, Edgar Allan Poe's complete works, open to the Raven. Ray smiled, understanding the message. Some stories ended exactly where they began, completing circles that had been broken for far too long. Delilah Montgomery's spirit had found its peace. The truth had been revealed, and justice had been served. The Raven had finally found its rest, and with it, so had the detective who had refused to let a cold case stay cold. In Riverside Falls, the dead could finally sleep peacefully, and the living could move forward without the weight of buried secrets. After 2 centuries of darkness, the town was ready to step into the light. Ray Kellerman drove home through streets that felt cleaner somehow, past houses where families slept safely, in a town that had finally learned the true price of prosperity built on innocent blood. His 11-year nightmare was over. The case was closed.